Neutral density filters. If you're into filmmaking or photography, you're probably familiar with this term. If not, let me briefly explain. A neutral density filter, or ND in short, is a piece of glass that reduces the amount of light entering your lens, much like a pair of sunglasses. For filmmakers, you cannot leave the house without one. It will drastically improve the quality and increase the cinematic look and feel of your videos. We'll get into the reasons why shortly. In this video, we'll talk about variable NDs, fixed NDs, built-in NDs, matte boxes, screw-on filters, why color shift and IR is an issue, when to use which filter, and which filter I use. Let's kick off with why you need to use an ND filter. When I shoot a project, I usually determine on which f-stop or t-stop I'd like to shoot the majority of the shots. For this example, we choose f2.0. I will always leave my ISO or AE at the base value, which in my case is 800 because I'm shooting on the Sony FX6. So the last adjustable variable that has influence on my exposure is my shutter speed or angle, which I almost always leave at double the frame rate or 180 degrees. When you look at this list, there's not a lot of room for change. So if we cannot control the amount of light because we are shooting outside, for example, we need an ND filter to do that for us if we want to keep the same look and feel throughout the whole project. For example, if I shoot at f2.0 inside, which creates beautiful soft images full of bokeh, and suddenly outside everything from my subject to Paris is in focus. Yeah, that will distract the viewer and might cause them to lose attention. Now you know the general idea of using an ND filter. Let's talk about the different filters on the market, variable NDs and fixed NDs. They may look the same, but the difference is quite significant. A fixed ND is a solid piece of darkened glass, while a variable ND is actually two pieces of polarized glass placed opposite on one another. When rotated, it gives a different intensity. Variable NDs are probably the best choice for 90% of the filmmakers out there, as this is such a quick way of shooting, and these days the quality of the glass is extremely good. A fixed ND filter, which comes in two sizes, either 4K4 or 4K 5.65, is best used when you're working with a camera assistant, as it's pretty time consuming to swap them out constantly. Right now, fixed filters offer superior quality and results, especially on higher intensity values. This has everything to do with the way these filters work. Vari NDs usually get a slight vignette and tint shift when nearing their maxed out values, while fixed filters are just large chunks of glass, so vignetting is not really an issue. Then there's also internal NDs. These are filters built into your camera body. You'll find these usually on higher end cinema cameras like the Sony FX6 or 9, or Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro and the Ursa, and for example the Canon C70. In this internal ND category, you got another two different NDs to make it even more confusing. Internal fixed NDs and internal variable NDs. To this day, only the Sony Cinema-Line cameras have these internal variable NDs. To be honest, it's what makes this camera stand out head and shoulders above the competition. Take the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, for example. When pressing the ND button, a piece of glass shifts in front of the sensor. When pressing it again, a different, more intense piece of glass shifts in front of the sensor. When doing this on a Sony FX6, only once does a piece of glass shift in front of the camera sensor. And after it's pressed, it's fully variably operated, which can be done automatically or manually. The automatic feature is amazing when you're doing documentary work, as you can walk from inside to outside and not physically change any settings that changes the way the image is behaving, such as shutter or aperture. Now we know the three different ND variations, but you might ask yourself, how do I use these fixed filters? The answer is matte boxes, that weird thing that sits at the end of your lens that a lot of people use to be cool. Let's be honest. The real reason one would want to use a matte box is to control flaring and to use NDs or diffusion filters. Let's discuss when to use screw-on filters or when to use a matte box. On smaller cameras, such as my FX3, I only use a variable ND screw-on filter. The reason is because of the weight and the style of shooting, as I'm often using this camera on a gimbal. Imagine this camera on a gimbal with a matte box. On bigger rigs, I use matte boxes more often. If I shoot outside in bright daylight, I almost always use one, as the sun can lower the contrast of your image significantly, which results in a washed out, cheap looking image. I also like a matte box when I use diffusion filters, such as a black Pro Mist 1/8 or 1/4. I leave the filter in my matte box, this way I'll never forget it when switching a lens. The last reason for me to use a matte box is when working with expensive vintage glass, for example. I then use a clear filter on tricky shots, such as car chases or shots that debris can fly out and hit the lens. Now, let's discuss the ongoing conversation of color shift and IR pollution. Color shift usually occurs when you max out your variable ND, with the majority of the ND brands shifting toward the green end. When you're using one filter for every shot, the color shift will probably not make that much of an impact to your shots. If you have a multiple camera setup and mix and match different brands of NDs, you're in for something else. Usually, the cheaper the glass is, the faster it will shift in color and the more vignetting or X pattern you will get. Next. Infrared pollution. It's quite a difficult topic, so I'll try to simplify this to the best of my abilities. Every digital camera records infrared light. This is because it's part of the color spectrum. That said, pretty much every new cinema camera features an IR filter that blocks an amount of IR light, which is fine when using no filter at all. But when we use an ND filter without infrared reduction built in, we get muddy looking blacks. This is almost impossible to correct in post, so you should take this seriously. The reason for this is when we are using an ND filter without an IR coating, it reduces the visible light waves, red, green, and blue, but passes through the IR waves. The camera's built-in filter is only strong enough to block an X amount of IR light waves. So, at some point, you will get IR pollution in your image. You can fix this with an IR cut filter, to screw it on top of your lens or to put it in your matte box. Make sure to keep an eye out on your monitor and check if it's a nice image or not. You can clearly see if there is IR contamination happening. Please don't say the phrase, "we'll fix it in post," because it's difficult, nearly impossible. Let's touch base and talk about my favorite filters. Since I started my filmmaking journey nearly 4 years ago, pretty much all available ND brands on the market went through my hands. I finally ended up using Nissi filters. Across all the projects I've done, never have I ever seen any artifacts, color shift, or vignetting ruining my shots. I've pushed it to the most difficult situations, from heavy snowfall, -20 degrees, to extreme heat, and it didn't let me down once. For the bigger projects, I use their fixed filters a lot, and they're just amazing. They're unbreakable, as far as glass is unbreakable, but they're generally super nice in quality. They recently also entered the matte box game, and I must be honest, this feels much like the crazy expensive Arri matte boxes I've rented. It's solid, well built, and the filter trays really feel good to me. Now, of course, a filter is a filter. I understand that for some, these filters are not within their budget. I would try out a bunch of different filters from a local rental or another filmmaking friend and see which one suits your camera sensor and your workflow best. That's it for this one. If you made it this far, let me know what your favorite filter is. Let's see who actually watches my videos all the way through. If that's you, a double thank you, and I'll see you later, my friends.